Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. On this week's episode, I interviewed Michael Schmid. His Twitter handle is at Schnitzel. And Michael is turning his water heater into a Bitcoin mining machine, or vice versa. He's turning his Bitcoin mining machine into a water heater, I guess. Um, but if you haven't seen him on Twitter, he's posting pictures of how he's doing this, and so I had to get him on because this is kind of like a Bitcoin mining episode. And as you guys know, I'm venturing into that, and just to give you a quick update, I'm going to do another like full longer discussion episode about it in a couple weeks probably. But we have we plugged ours in, and I plugged it in after I did this interview with him. So I didn't even know how much heat these things kick off, but they kick off a lot of heat. And they really you got to do something with it. You could just pump it outside, which is my plan, at least for the time being in the summer. But yeah, Michael came up with this idea to create his own system, to so his hot water heater doesn't use any electricity at this point. And he has old, they're not even new ASICs, they're just old S9s. So the older models that normally would be barely profitable, but whenever you're replacing the electricity that it uses, they're replacing the electricity of the water heater with his S9. It's a wash, and then you left over with sats. So there's just a ton of options of where this could go in the future. So I'm really excited about it, and I really enjoyed my conversation with Michael. I want to thank the Bitbox O2 hardware wallet. That is our sponsor, brought to you by Shift Crypto. Go to shiftcrypto.ch/Bitcoin made simple. Use the promo code Bitcoin Made Simple to get 5% off of your order. Get a hardware wallet and secure your sats off of the exchange. And also Movies Plus. Thank you guys for supporting. I just made an announcement the other day on Twitter. It's crazy though, but we surpassed 250,000 downloads of our app, which is nuts. So I think the app's launched September last year. So it's crazy. And it just kind of blew me away. And so I want to thank you guys, because I know a lot of you support us there. But there's plenty of Bitcoin documentaries on there, and we're adding more as we go. So please check them out. Go to mymoviesplus.com. You can start your free trial, download the apps in any of the app stores. And if you want to get in touch with me, just follow me on Twitter at Cory_Tusick, or you can email the show bitcoinmadesimplepodcast@gmail.com. Thanks. So if you don't want to dox yourself, that's fine. But where are you from?
I'm originally from Switzerland, and I live in Virginia in the US now.
Oh, okay. Well, it's funny. Maybe 30 minutes before we did this, I got on. I don't know what. It's one of those things like you ever go on YouTube for one specific thing, and then you get sucked into something else. And I ended up finding like this old YouTube channel of mine, and it was like this one channel I made to document my trip to Switzerland with my buddy in college.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like seriously 30 minutes ago. And I started watching it. He's from Switzerland. He's from Zurich.
Uh-huh.
So I went over there with him in the summer, and I started watching some of it, and I actually had to stop because it was making me too depressed. Like it was making me too sad. Like I missed it. So, I mean, God, this was close to like 15 to some odd 20,
Oh,
18
wow.
years
Okay.
ago. So
Yeah.
like, I mean, I'm old now, I'm in my mid 30s, and
Same here.
and yeah, I was just like looking at it, and first off, I was like, holy cow, I was in shape. What in the world has happened since then? And then second of all, I was like, man, that was such an awesome trip. I just want to go back, like, because we could go over to Switzerland and it would be fun and we'd have a good time. And not that you don't want your kids to be there and all that kind of stuff. And he's got kids and they'd be able to play with each other and yada yada. But it's like, we were just carefree teenagers, like just doing whatever the hell
Wow.
we wanted. So yeah, it was funny that you're from Switzerland, and
Nice.
yeah, I love Switzerland. And that's where the Bitbox O2 hardware wallet is made.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, it's funny. I was in Miami, and like hearing some people talk Swiss German to each other was like a very weird. So
Oh yeah, well, because I didn't know this until my room. He was my roommate freshman year, but and then we were just best friends. But like I learned from him that Swiss German is very distinct.
mhm.
It's not the same as German
Yes.
German.
Yes, correct. Yeah, we call it the High German.
Oh yeah.
And usually somebody from Germany does not understand the Swiss German out of the box. Like it's if they live there for a couple of months or years, then they can understand it. Because it's very similar. It's just a simplified version of the normal German.
Mm-hmm.
But initially they have no idea what you're saying. But it's the same also for Austrians. So if the Austrians speak like their super dialecty Austrian German, it's also very hard to understand.
Okay. In like the different parts of Switzerland, right? It's like there's the Swiss German, which is most of the country, right?
Yeah, it's like 40%. Yes.
And then there's the Swiss French,
Correct.
The Swiss Italian.
Yep. Correct. Then there's a fourth one that is called Romansch.
Yeah,
which is its own language. It's only like in 3 valleys spoken. I think it's only like 30,000 people. So.
Oh wow. Yeah. No, are you from the Zurich area? Or?
Yes. Yeah, I grew up around outside of Zurich, but then moved as soon as I started working. I moved into Zurich.
Okay. Yeah, he lived in Richtersville. You're familiar with that?
I could place it on the map. Yeah, I roughly know where it is. Yeah.
It was right on the lake. I mean, now I'm getting like sad again thinking about like, oh man, I want to go back in time and go. It was just, it was right on the lake. Spend the summer there. It was a blast. And yeah, Switzerland is a beautiful, beautiful country. I ended up then taking my wife later once we were both old married men, and we went over and visited with him and his wife, and then I took her up to the top of the Alps, and stuff like that. But we were more adventurous. We did it with cars and climbing and stuff whenever we were younger. But once I was an old married man, we took a gondola up to the top. We're like,
there's always two chances. Like there's always like you can either walk up or you can gondola up. So depending on what you want. So
yeah. So anyways, but yeah, I can't say enough good things about Switzerland. And I mean, does that kind of have any root in what got you into Bitcoin? Because Switzerland's very privacy focused. I wanted to ask you your Bitcoin origin story, but like, Switzerland, privacy focused, independent, and neutral, which is kind of like the libertarian dream.
Yeah. Yes and no. So interestingly, I've heard about Bitcoin like very early on, but more from a tech angle, because I was interested in cryptography and just the fact that you can use cryptographic computer tools. Like at that point, I didn't really understand too much about it, but that basically you can prevent the double spending problem. I was like, that was interesting. So that's why I looked into it. But because Switzerland has basically a very stable monetary system, I never realized how broken the monetary system in the world is. So in one way, it brought me into it very early, but also it kept me out of it. And only when I moved to the US, realizing like how all the system works, I got way more into Bitcoin because I realized putting my money into dollars is going to be a bit of a hard system for the future. So it's like, it's interesting. But now it's definitely, I see some things happening in Switzerland. I mean, specifically with Lugano now, like almost making it legal tender. I think that's definitely like, it's very spoken to Switzerland, and also the laws are very open because Switzerland actually, you can use any other legal tender, like as a company, if you want to, let's say, accept another currency, you can. Like there's nothing that prevents you from doing it. And that's just because Switzerland always had to accept other currencies because their own, of course, was always a very stable one. But it was also always like you could always pay in dollars. You can pay in euros, even in some, like at the grocery store, you can pay in euros, no problem at all. So I think Swiss people and the laws are very open for new monetary ideas or new currencies. And so that's definitely makes the Bitcoin part much, much easier.
Yeah, that blew me away whenever I went over there, just as like a teenager, just being like very uncultured. I mean, other than going to Canada, it was the first time I left the country. And so, it was like the fact that we were actually able to pay with dollars in some places. But then, I mean, we used, Swiss francs a lot, and the euro, this is like mid 2000s, the euro was coming in.
Yeah.
So I had like a little like mix of everything, that we took out with us whenever we would go out to like the, the clubs and the bars or whatever. And you had to make sure you had some of each. And, And then it was interesting. It's funny too, because my friend, I have to text him because I think he might listen because he'll text me about Bitcoin every once in a while. But
Nice.
but like I don't know if he remembers this. One of the first conversations we ever had was about how steady how steady. If we were talking about Bitcoin in 2004, we would have been way ahead of our time.
Oh,
No,
that wouldn't.
that would have been a little crazy. But one of the first conversations we ever had was how stable the monetary system in Switzerland is. I have no idea. We're not econ majors or anything. Like we were athletes that just did communications to do it, and we were talking about that, and then now we're both into Bitcoin and everything. But yeah, it's interesting, and if I would love, it would be such a great citadel country if it wasn't landlocked. That's the only downside to me is that you can be surrounded by the rest of the craziness.
Yeah, I think it's a good. I'm like being a dual citizen. I think it gives me. I mean, I'm Swiss citizen. I don't have a US passport yet. But it's just like it's a good backup, I would say, because you can hide in the mountains very well. There's a couple of places that if somebody tries to find you, this is going to be quite hard. So I think that's definitely a good thing. But I agree with you now. Actually, living on the water here in the US, the landlockedness is definitely quite hard. So
that's something that is like a Bitcoiner's dream because I do like being in the Alps. There are parts of the Alps that like will basically be like the valleys between the mountain peaks that are not connected to like anything really.
Correct. Yep.
And you just look down and it's really cool because we were up there in the summertime and it's snowing on us, because you're up so high. But you look down and you can like see plain as day this like little village,
and
it's like green grass and like meadows, and it's just this like little oasis of maybe like a couple square miles or something, maybe very small, maybe not even square miles, maybe I don't know. I mean, it's enough for a small village.
Correct. And it's also very self-sufficient. Like it's what we're all talking about in the Bitcoin specifically, like how like everybody has chickens, everybody has they know how to hunt, they all have a garden at home. So it's a lot of, because even if you want food, it involves, in the past it involved walking, now it still involves taking a train or a car or somewhere. And so I think it's overall it's a more self-sufficient, self-sovereign culture in general.
Man, now I'm amped. I just came up with a movie idea because I don't even know if that's my background is in the movie business.
Oh, no, I didn't.
Yeah, that's what I do for a living and have a streaming platform that also sponsors this show. So look at this. I've worked in Bitbox as the first sponsor. So I worked them in already. And then now I'm working in Movies Plus. But seriously, like now I kind of want to travel there and just do a documentary about a self-sustaining little town, a little village. That would be fascinating. Maybe this will be better as a series. There we go. I'm going to make a series. I've been looking for something like this. And I can go around the world to different places, but I can start in Switzerland because it is fascinating. And I remember back then, like looking at it going like, that is unbelievable that there is this little village and like the whole world could blow up and they don't like
they would never
they would never notice. They're like, I'm curious that's actually even fascinating to think about what it was like during the pandemic to be there, like because they didn't have they don't have contact really with the outside world. They could if they wanted.
I mean the thing though is like the school system and everything is still controlled from like state level and federal
so you're
level,
forced
and like I mean at the beginning of the pandemic the public transport just shut down, and that was like if you take away the public transport from Switzerland that's a forced lockdown, because I mean maybe if you live in the valleys you maybe have a car, but even like long distance travel you don't do with a car. Like any travel for more than an hour in Switzerland is like with a car is
getting a train.
Is like or like you plan this for 2 days ahead. So, and so I think it still had a big impact, but no, I agree. Like it is definitely of like to be like a model for how communities could work together. It is definitely something we could look at. And it's just like, I mean, I never lived, I mean, the smallest town that I lived in Switzerland was 2,000 people. So I knew like the mayor and I knew a couple of people. Now I actually live in a 400 people town in the US, and it's even more familiar. But no, there are towns in Switzerland that have like 50, 100 people. They have a school, they have a grocery store, but everything also works on like a lot of times, at least of what I've been told, is that it's just a lot of trust. So like if you need something, like if you go to the grocery store and you forgot your wallet, oh well, then I'll pay next time. Because everybody knows each other. Like
they'll just mark it down and be like, okay, yeah, like Michael, you'll get us next time,
Correct.
Well,
yeah.
And you will, and you won't cheat them out of it, because if you cheat them out of it, then
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I'm just like, I'm kind of blown away by thinking about this right now. And I could really go down that rabbit hole, because I live in a town now that, similar to you, I think it has at most 500 people in it.
Nice.
And it doesn't, like, I was telling somebody in town that like I went like a month without seeing a stoplight, like a traffic light. And I was like, and I grew up in the suburbs and went to college in the city and all that kind of, like I very city oriented life. And so I'm in a different world, but I love it. And it's, there is that self-sustaining model where you look at the circular economy and you go, all right, so like in that little village in Switzerland, in the Swiss Alps, like, what do you need to survive? You need food, you need shelter, you need water. The water can be, is plentiful up there, it melts from the mountains and comes down. Okay, so you get chickens and a couple other animals, and farm the land, and you should be good.
Yeah it is.
Like you might occasionally need outside resources, but like if there's one person that takes over, does all the chickens, then you do the cows, and it's just a barter system.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
I think there are, we'll probably need to do some research, but I do believe there are many towns that still work exactly that way.
Just purely on a barter system.
Yeah, or just like a lot of trust. Like there might be monetary like currency involved in some parts, but not like, not the way that I could go to the grocery store and I have a tab open there, and then every third time I pay. Or just like that also like, there's just so much more helping each other. Like if I need something from somebody, they will give it to me because they know there will be another time that they need something from myself. So I think that's at least my experience. Specifically, like I was a year long in the Swiss military, and so we always worked with the farmers there, and that's how it always worked. Like you just like, yes, they technically got some money from us, like from the military if they opened up their like farm for us to stay there, but there was just this unspoken agreement that if you send like 200 people to stay at a farm for a night, 50 of them are going to help with the cows. Like that's just like, and so there was never really like this like focus on like, okay, but how much do we pay now? How many people were there? And that's this amount of cost. It's more like, do you need help? I can give it to you. How can you help me?
That's so interesting. And I think that is just something that like most Bitcoiners are sitting there probably listening to this and going like, oh my God, like move me there now. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But what is fascinating to me is that I do think in the US this also exists. It's just a bit harder to find, and it's maybe not in places that you would initially think about moving or living. But now, having lived now for 2 years in such a small town, it's really fascinating to me that the longer I live here, the more I realize that this is how we're meant to live as humans. Like, I know every of my neighbor, and I used to live in Austin, Texas, in an apartment building, really next to some other people that I've never met. Like, if you met in the hallway, you're like
you're like, whoa, like all weird around them.
Yeah. And now, like, I know, like, first of all, nobody locks the houses here. Like, there's just trust. Because if somebody is at our house, I have at least 3 neighbors texting me saying, hey, there's a person at your house that I've never seen before. So
no, that's exactly, we did whenever we were moving in. I had like a spotting light
Yeah.
like shown on me from like acres away because like they didn't know that like we had bought the house and like we were just I was moving stuff. Like I watched a football game, a Steelers football game, and the game ended at like, 8:30 at night and it was dark. And so I drove up to like take a load of stuff up and like, somebody was snooping around,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, it's like you would have people texting each other like what in the
Yes.
world?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And
that's where you live now. Like, I mean, it kind of
yes.
makes sense. It's like a community, like it's
Correct.
really what you're supposed to
And I
live in.
feel how much is like there's just so much trust and care for each other. Like if anybody needs help with anything, I mean, usually you'll find more than one person that will help you with that. And and also just like a lot of trust and caring. And it's really it's the longer I'm here, I realize that this is where humans really strive. Like I do think that we can have a max amount of connections, like really deep connections with other people, and that can really be the case with the people you live close by. Because if it's that, these are the people that you can use every single day to help you or to watch each other's dogs or houses and whatever. And I do feel that's like, I don't know how this could be, but I really do feel that like with fiat specifically, that this causes us to be more individuals,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like not trusting each other, and with Bitcoin, where there's a ledger where everybody knows you cannot steal each other's money and stuff. I
You
think
can't
that
live off the system with Bitcoin.
correct, yes, and I think that hopefully will create more of these communities that really trust each other, and humans can be humans again.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be awesome. And I think that's really honestly what most Bitcoiners really want. It's funny, we get into this for number go up, and then, you like find this
Oh
like
yeah.
inspiration of humanity. Um, so when did you, first really start to take Bitcoin seriously? Like you said, you kind of noticed, oh, the double spend problem was fixed early on, but like most of us, we just kind of breezed
Yeah.
past it.
So I had like 3 times that I really like got in contact with Bitcoin. The first 2 times I just like dismissed it. Like I said, the very first time was probably I had to look it up. It's like 2011 or so. There's like a really entrepreneurial tech community in Switzerland. I mean, specifically around Zurich. It's called a bit like the Silicon Valley of Europe. So people always talked about new things, and there was actually a meetup in 2011 about Bitcoin. And I went there and I mined on my computer and stuff like that. And but at that time I looked at it and I was mostly like, it's interesting and it's a cool technology from just the capability of the cryptographic part of it. But at that time, nobody knew how this could really scale, because we looked at it and said, okay, this can do 6 transactions a second. This can never be a monetary global network. And layer 2, like nobody even talked about this at that point, because
didn't even exist. Yeah.
It's like, so I was like, okay, I mean, that's maybe not so interesting.
I
And
assume
then
you lost those coins that you mined on your computer.
I have no idea where they are.
You don't ever sit there and think about how many there were. And
No, I mean, I don't want to think about it too much because it hurts me too much. But I do know that you were able easily to mine 1 Bitcoin a day, because the block reward was 50. So
yeah, and you could do it on a laptop.
Yes, yeah, and like the very first pools. So Slush Pool, which was one of the very first one. Well, it was actually called mining.ccs, so something else. I mean, it was super simple to get Bitcoin. So we just sent each other whole Bitcoins for fun. Like, like if somebody had no idea, it's like, oh wait, let me send you one, and then somebody sent you half back, and also the transactions, you didn't have to add a fee. Like transactions were free. Yeah, you could add a fee, but why would you? Like there was no reason to add a fee to the. So I do remember, like when you sent, like the minimum was 0. Yeah. And so I played with that a bit, and somehow I then got involved in my own companies and was very focused on this. And then, of course, there was the run up. So it went from like $10 to $100 or so. And I was like, oh, okay, 10 times. Yeah, maybe I should buy some. Bought some, put it all in Mt. Gox, and lost them all again. So that was
that's even worse.
Yeah, that was the second time I was like, yeah, maybe that's not such cool. But again, I just looked at Bitcoin itself, and I never really looked at the other thing. Like I just valued Bitcoin for what it is by itself, but I never valued it compared to regular fiat money. Because I didn't have the knowledge about fiat, because coming from Switzerland, like a 401k is given to you by the government. Like there's no, like when you turn 25, suddenly you have a 401k, like it's there. Your employer has to give you one. Social Security is very good. There's all this encouragement to like have your own IRAs and stuff like that. At the time, inflation was maybe at, I don't know, 1%, 0.5%. It was very low. And the returns were like 7 to 8%. So it totally made sense to save money in fiat. And so I never really looked at, okay, what could go wrong? I was also never a big saver. I was never really interested in like saving a lot of money. Because I also felt like there's probably better ways to invest my money and time. So yeah, that was the second time. And then when the Mt. Gox happened, I mean, it was just like, it threw me off again from Bitcoin specifically. And I was like, okay. And then over the years, I've heard about it again. I saw layer 2, I saw Lightning, I played a bit with that. And I was like, okay, well, this solves the fast spending, but still I didn't have the knowledge about the money printing and that stuff. And then end of 2019, beginning 2020, basically I've heard how the US government prints all this money. And I was just like, I mean, I don't have a lot of economic knowledge, but this somehow doesn't make sense to me, that you just can print more money and there will be no effect to all of it. So I started to listen to podcasts like Preston Pish's We Study Billionaires. That was I was actually rebuilding a sailboat, and I had a lot of time. So I listened to basically all his podcasts in probably like 3 days, just from the beginning to the end. And that's where I would say like I got orange peeled, not because of Bitcoin, but I realized how broken our system is. And having the knowledge about what Bitcoin could do, knowing about layer 2, it all started to click. Like it all made some sense that yes, this money printing is going to hurt us. Inflation is going to go up. I mean, at that point, it was still low. And look where we are here. And so, yeah, that's when I started to put some of my of savings, just starting to DCA into Bitcoin. Now, trying to get my Mt. Gox or my Gox coins somehow back. So we'll see if that's possible. But if, then, I mean, they will give you maybe a fourth of all of it. Which, I mean, you bought them at $100. Yeah. So I would say in the end, probably it's still a better deal, because I'm pretty sure I would probably have sold at $10,000.
Yeah. So you'll get a fourth of the coins, not a fourth of the fiat value.
So it really depends what you claimed at the time when Mt. Gox collapsed, because you had fiat value, you had fiat values, and you had Bitcoins, and you basically had to claim what you had at the time. And like initially I had US dollars, or I was sad that I didn't convert them into US dollars, because I felt I will get US dollars back, because the price dropped like massively after it. But I had Bitcoins in there. So all I could do, I could claim the couple of Bitcoins that I had in there. And at the beginning I was like, oh no, this is going to be bad. Now I'm actually happy, because the people that claimed dollars never saw the dollars so far. So like they now missed like 100 times or like 60 times of growth. And so I bought at 100, and I most probably would have sold at 10,000.
Oh yeah.
Now I was like forced hodled into it, because there's no access to them, and hopefully we'll all get them back in some way. So I think in the long term, it's actually a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. You know, and then you got to just keep hodling it and pretend like
Of
it doesn't
course.
even exist, right? At
Yeah,
that point.
exactly. Yeah,
That's
no.
um that's it's funny that you say that what got you into it, because I was the same. I mean, I'm not a tech person, like as far as like actually writing code and all
Hmm.
that fun stuff. I'm I'm very interested in tech though, and always like I'm an entrepreneur, so outside of filmmaking, I like starting businesses and whatnot. So from the tech side, I was always paying attention to it and looking at it from like a kind of like a 30,000 foot view of like, oh, this would be really cool. But it was just like you until I realized how broken our monetary system was.
Hmm.
And I've said this before, so my listeners have heard it, um, but until like the beginning of 2020, I thought that if the Fort Knox was ever raided and they like found out that we didn't have enough gold to cover our
Hmm.
currency,
Hmm.
that like it would be a national crisis and like the world would implode. And
Ah,
then like all of a sudden I find out, I'm like, wait a minute. We haven't been on a gold standard since 1971. I was like, this
doesn't
already
matter anyway.
happened a long time ago. And then I'm sitting there, then I start digging in and I'm like, oh my God. And so it was like page after page where that would like layer after layer
Yeah.
that peel back. And I was like, oh my God. And then I did the same thing as you. I put some in because I was like, this is going to implode. And then I actually told Preston this, that I was listening to his podcast talking about quantitative easing. I'd never heard that term in my life. And he starts describing it about how they're printing money and have been since the financial crisis. And I was cutting the grass and like stopped the lawnmower and started Googling quantitative easing. And I was like, what in the world? Oh my God. Oh my God. And so it was like by the end of that, like, cutting my grass, I was like, I'm converting everything into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Like this is all the dollar is trash. It's all gone. It's done. It's done. This is over.
Yeah.
Nobody just realized it yet. So I kind of had that same thing. And it's funny because you're someone that was trading Bitcoin for nothing with somebody in
Yeah,
2011.
no, it's
And then you were like, wait a minute, this whole system's broken. So what do you think about that when you think about Satoshi? Like, I mean, because the master level, the doctorate
oh,
level understanding of so many different fields is what's amazing.
yes. I mean there have been a couple of times that like even now today of like what we're seeing of what's happening where yeah, it's almost godlike, like the knowledge or the foresight of what will happen or how the ideas that Satoshi had turned out to be correct or solve the problems. Like specifically now mining, that specific part of like what everything we're discovering about the mining part itself is fascinating to me. And I I do I have talked to a couple of gold bugs that I mean basically say, look, we're saying these things since basically 1970. Like it's not I don't think it's like brand new knowledge. So I don't think Satoshi came up with like new knowledge that the current system is broken. That was known. I
Mm-hmm.
think Satoshi just looked at it from a completely different way because at least at that time, everybody said we should just go back to gold. And standing up and saying, no, gold is actually not the solution at all because it's slow, it's heavy, it's not dividable, and all these things. And coming up with a completely new idea and taking like what Hashcash and all these other things have done and combining them new, I think that's the part that is so fascinating to me, how somebody could come up with that idea and making it so beautiful and solving all these problems that gold itself has, but also all the other first ideas of like digital money and solving them. It's just like, yeah, I don't know how this happened or if it was a single person or a group of people. But yeah, I think as humans, we're gonna, for a long, long time, look back to that white paper and wonder how this was possible.
Yeah, yeah, it's mind blowing. Um, so one of the things I wanted to talk to you
Mhm.
about is your very innovative invention. So, you have gotten into Bitcoin mining. You have I see an ASIC behind you.
Yes.
Is it running right now in mining or
No,
I
that's
was gonna
actually one
say,
of my It's a T9 instead of an S9. So it's still mined, but I can't use it in the water heater. So it's my like model to know how big they are and figuring out
Yeah.
stuff. So
Okay. Because I just started mining at home. And I'm doing a series in the
mhm.
podcast of like walking people through. I don't know if you saw that.
Yep. Listen to it. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I'm, figuring it out, piecing it together.
Mhm.
But what got you into mining? And I'll just, then we can get into it. I'll let people know at the intro, but like that you made a water heater
Correct.
out of an ASIC miner.
Yes.
So what got you into mining? Because you buy Bitcoin and then you all of a sudden go, you know what, I'm gonna mine too.
Yes. So like I said at the very beginning of like 2011, mining was like the only way to actually get Bitcoin. Like you couldn't buy them anywhere. So the
Yeah.
only way to get them is you had to mine them. So if you wanted to play a bit, you had to start this Bitcoin node or core on your computer and just ran it on the side, like while you worked. At the end of the day, you had a couple of Bitcoin in there, and then you were able to play around. So that was, but at that time, of course, it was only computers. Then people switched to GPUs. That part I didn't join because at that point I already said like, okay, I'm not so interested in this anymore. And then I've heard about ASICs and all that stuff, but only when I actually got like again into Bitcoin in 2020, I realized how big of a mining infrastructure that exists, because I like when I saw the first pictures of like Riot mining companies with like just endless amounts of miners, like I first didn't believe that this is actually correct. Because I started with like my computer, and so I looked at the miners, and I'm currently working out of my garage, and I'm remodeling it, and I needed a heater, and I only had a space heater, and I knew that a Bitcoin miner generates heat, so I basically just bought a friend of mine. He had a T9 sitting around, and I was like, "Hey, do you want it?" I don't need it, and I paid him a couple of bucks, and he sent it to me, and I turned it on, and it was super loud. So that was the first problem. Like, it's like 90 decibels, but I replaced it. I figured out another fan, and I just heated my garage with it, just when
While
I
you're
needed
working
it.
in it.
Yeah, and that was like my first. But I never really like the whole, like at that point I was like, okay, I can just use it instead of a space heater, and I looked at that. Then one more thing that I did is my wife and I, we have an Airstream trailer, and we went to Colorado for 6 weeks. So I actually took at that point I bought then an S9. So I took the S9 with us and piped it into the Airstream. So the S9 was outside, and there was a piping into the Airstream, and that's how we heated the Airstream when we were stationary. Because fun fact that you don't actually pay for the electricity at the RV parks. I mean, you pay for this, you pay for the space, but how much electricity that you use doesn't actually matter. We have a rather small Airstream. Like there's these huge 50-foot rigs that use way more electricity than even we with an S9. And so
Could
I
you
played
plug
with
into
that.
a 220 there, or would you have to?
It depends. Some of them have 220, some of them only have 110. But the hard part is actually like, if we were like while in Colorado, where it's like 20 degrees all the time, we use like half a propane bottle a day to heat the Airstream.
Yeah.
And so every like second or third day, I had to run somewhere to refill the propane. It was just painful. And so I really just tried to solve a problem of like, how don't I have to do that anymore? And the S9, it wasn't able to fully heat the Airstream, specifically during the night, because it just gets so cold. But I was able to reduce the propane usage by 50%. And the plan is for next winter to just have two S9s and maybe even run it, heat the Airstream all the time with that. So that was like the second involvement. And then it really, really started to click for me when I realized that inside the water heater that everybody has at home, if it's an electrical one, it's basically just a resistive heating element that does nothing else than just run the electrons through, and it just heats the water. And technically, your miner and your water heater generate the same amount of heat with the same electricity.
Yeah.
And when I realized that, because somehow up until that point, I thought the water heater is somehow more efficient. I don't know why, but that's just like was in my brain that it has to be more efficient than just like 100%. Most probably because I knew about heat pumps, like in mini splits, ACs, and there it's actually more efficient than, so you generate more heat or cooling from just pure the electricity. But in a water heater, it's not the case at all. And so I looked at that and said like, okay, wait, so if I could use the heat of the miner to heat the water in the water heater, I would use the same amount of electricity, aka I will pay the same amount to my electrical grid company. But at the end of the month, one of them, the miner, would also generate Bitcoin. And dependent on what miners I have, it would actually generate more Bitcoin in dollar value than what I paid for the electricity. So I would actually get paid for showering and heating the water. And I was like, wait, so like, I thought about that and I calculated it through and I was like, no, that can't, like, wait, is this really correct? And I looked and I found people on Twitter that also did this already. Like there were a couple of people that already started to think about or like play with this. They had though a slightly bit different setups than mine. And I was like, okay, let's build it. But up until that point, I have never done any immersion stuff. So that was like something because the problem is, how do you get the heat from the miner that is made for air cooling into the water? Because you can't just, I mean, it would be cool to just put the miner into the water, but that's not going to work. And there's all these like systems that you can like waterproof electricity or like electrical boards, but that's not working because it generates so much heat that that coating would prevent the heat to actually dissipating. So there are people that tried it, and it's very like the risk that you break the miner is too big. And so and I researched a bit, and there are these liquids, they're called dielectrical liquids, which basically are non-conductive. So they're oils that are made they come from like immersion servers. So there's always existed in data centers. And there's one company specifically called Engineering Fluids. They create a liquid called BitCool, which is specifically made for miners. And I've heard about all of this. And then Bitcoin Miami came up, and I saw all these companies are going to be there. I saw people that already built similar systems to that, also being in Miami. And I was like, okay, I booked the ticket there and basically just talked to anybody I could find that has built an immersion cooling system or immersion cooling that then use the heat.
For something
Most people,
else.
they just vent the hot air outside with a radiator. Like that's what the industrial systems do.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't actually use the heat. But I luckily found a couple of people that have done like pool heating systems. So they just circulate the hot oil together with the water from the pool. And from there, I thought like, okay, I have to try. Like I cannot not try anymore. And
so you're able
where
to
the idea came.
So you're able to completely heat your water
Correct.
with a Bitcoin miner.
Correct.
And
yes.
So you have to have it in immersion. It has to be
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
so explain how it works. Like you have it in a tank?
Correct.
Like a fish tank?
Yes. So what I did is I bought basically a fish tank at Walmart, and I put in a glass, so a separator between, so it has two compartments basically.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is the miner upside down, because the heat wants to go up. So you make sure that, because the miner usually is front to back cooled, so you do it upside down, and you pipe. And in my case, it's CPVC pipes that puts in the liquid at the bottom of the miner, and on the top, the water then falls into the other compartment, and there is another pipe that sucks the oil back out. So you have this constant flow. Circulation, yes. You could just like put it in one side and the other side, but if you want it as efficient as possible, you want to have this system where the oil is dispersed at the bottom and goes up by itself because it gets warm, and then it flows on top away.
And so then when it flows away into the other side,
yes,
that oil, then how does it heat the water?
Yes, so then it goes through a pump. It's just a normal circulation pump that you would have for like radiation heating systems at home. Okay. So it's a pump made to run all the time. And it then goes into a plate heat exchanger. So you have to imagine it's basically a block of metal. It's copper, and it has 4 holes, and it's 2 sections. And each of the section, the liquid passes by each other, but never touches. So that's the important part. So you can pump in one liquid through one of the hole, and it comes out of the other one. And you can pump in another liquid through the other hole, and it comes out of the 4th hole. And they're really close. So these plates are like 1/10 of an inch maybe apart. And because of that, there is heat exchange happening, because the oil that comes from the miner is around 140 Fahrenheit hot, and goes into that exchanger, into that plate exchanger. And what you also do at the same time, you pump colder water through it as well. And so the colder water, because heat or 2 liquids that have different temperatures, they always want to equalize. They basically touch each other through the copper, and it cools the oil, and it heats the water from that you pass through. Okay. And so basically then the oil goes back to the miner, passes through the miner again, gets heated up again, and goes back. So there's one circle of the oil that always rotates on one side, or of the oil side. Okay. And on the other side, every water heater has a flush valve at the bottom to flush it out. Like if you ever need to do maintenance or replace it, there's a valve at the bottom that you can open that all the water comes out. So what I do is I put a pump at the flush valves of the water heater, and the pump pumps the water from the bottom through the plate exchanger, where it gets hot, into the inlet where normally the cold water from the municipal comes in. So it basically constantly circulates the water that is in the water tank by the plate exchanger. So I'm using the water heater that usually has a heating element inside. I turn off the heating element completely, and I just use it as hot water storage. Okay. So basically, throughout the day, the miner runs, and it runs at like 300 watts. So it's one single S9 right now, and it runs at like 200 to 300 watts. And at that level, it is able to keep the water warm. So the water is around 120 to 130, 140 degrees in the water tank. So both loops, they're always running. And as soon as somebody uses water, so let's say you take a shower, the hot water is taken out of the tank, and I have a temperature sensor that measures the temperature of the water in the tank, and it realizes that it drops. Then it tells the miner, hey, go to 1,600 watts, which is the max of an S9. So it heats up, or it uses more energy, therefore creates more heat. And then the water drops in the water tank because you add fresh water from the outside, which is cool, like that's maybe 60, 70 degrees. So the water drops quite fast in the water tank. And then you stop taking a shower, and then the miner will heat it up again to 130, 140, depending on what I set it to. And then at 140, it tells the miner again, okay, hey, we're hot enough. And then it goes down to like 300 watts where it can just stabilize the water so the next shower can be taken.
Huh. So if you had it running at full clock the whole time, what would the temperature be?
I've never tried.
It would be probably pretty hot then.
Yes.
Like hot tub level.
I mean, so the problem is the miner will stop at one point because the chips, they can go. So right now, if I run it at full at 1,600 watts, the chips get up to 100 Celsius, which is like 212 Fahrenheit. And they actually have an internal shut off at, I think, 115 Celsius. So that's like 240 Fahrenheit. So if I would run it, it would basically heat the water probably to like 150 to 160 degrees. But because you don't take enough energy anymore away from the oil also heats up. The chips also heat up, and at one point they will shut off. They will let their internal safety will come in, and then the miner will probably restart or stop, or you can actually break it. Like you should not run the chips hotter than 115.
Okay.
But what is good, so if you use like a custom firmware like Brains, which is like an open source version of the Antminer software, you can actually tell it to automatically scale down when a temperature is reached. So it internally automatically starts to use less and less energy as soon as it realizes that the chips reach a specific temperature.
Okay. So you do that just on the software?
Correct.
Like you would operate the miner from on your computer?
Yes. So that's actually one of the interesting things. So the mine, specifically for the S9 software of Brains, it can only scale down. It doesn't scale up automatically. That's something that is not implemented. And also, so basically the only way for the feedback loop would be the temperature of the chip itself. The problem is the temperature of the chip is basically dependent on the temperature of the oil, which is dependent on the temperature of the water. And I'm actually interested in the temperature of the water. I don't care how hot the chip is, or I don't care how hot the oil is. I care that I can take a shower in the same temperature. So what I actually built is I added a temperature sensor to the water that gets circulated through the water tank. And I'm using a tool called Home Assistant, which is an open source house automation system that can be used for light switches and like smart plugs and all these things. So it already has support for like temperature sensors. And I built a component or a plugin for Home Assistant to control the miners. So I can, based on the temperature of the water, I can tell the miner what to do. And I don't have to wait until the water cools down, then the oil cools down, then the chip cools down, to then the miner realize, oh, I should scale up. So immediately if somebody uses water, I can tell the miner already, go to full speed, because the water will cool down, or it will need the additional energy.
And you're just using the temperature sensor in the water heater?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so then let me walk through this. So you have the cold water coming in from, the municipality or wherever you get your water.
Yes.
Goes into the water heater.
Yes.
And then out the release valve is where you have the water come out there, go through the heating plate.
Correct.
And then with PVC pipe just go up and back into the water heater.
Correct. Yes. It goes back to where the water comes from, the municipality.
So is it like connected in? Like you had to like...
Yep, it's a T.
Yep. Okay, a T pipe.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by the Bitbox O2 hardware wallet from Shift Crypto. I have been telling you guys to get your Bitcoin off of the exchanges, and you got to do that and get it into a Bitbox O2 hardware wallet. It is the easiest wallet to use. It's simple. Somebody like me can set it up in 5 minutes, and anybody can. It's simple, easy to use, fun to use because I actually enjoy sending my sats off the exchange. And, if you're a true Bitcoiner, you understand that feeling. You're like, yes, sticking it to the exchange, drawing up that liquidity and putting it into your Bitbox O2 hardware wallet. So if you want to get one and get 5% off, go to shiftcrypto.ch/Bitcoin made simple. Use the promo code Bitcoin made simple, and then you'll get your 5% off. And thanks again to the Bitbox O2 hardware wallet. Grab yourself one of those and tell them that we sent you. And so what I'm curious, how much did it offset the electrical use of your water heater?
What do you mean with offset?
Like, does your water heater use electricity anymore?
Oh, yes. So what I'm currently trying to figure out is to measure how much loss that the system has, because there will be some losses, because by a normal water heater has just an input and an output, cold water in, hot water out, and inside the water heater is the heating element.
Mm-hmm.
So usually there's two heating elements, and when they heat the water directly, but the heat all stays in the water heater. And if you touch a water heater from the outside, even though the water inside is 120, 140 degrees, it's cold because it's insulated. Now, what I'm doing is I'm heating a liquid outside of the water heater that's in the normal room, that goes through piping through the plate exchanger and goes back. And so it heats the room a little bit, like the room is warm where the whole system is in. Also, I have pumps. I have two pumps, one for the oil and one for the water. They also use a little bit of electricity that usually you wouldn't have in the system. So what I'm currently measuring is I'm comparing like days and weeks. So I'm looking at a whole week with just a water heater, and I'm looking a whole week with the miner, and I'm comparing the electrical usage. From a purely, like, in the end, they will use the exact same energy. It's just the miner uses more because you have some loss into the room, and the pump itself, there's like kinetic energy that to move it all around. I have some preliminary results, and right now it looks between 5 to maybe 10% more energy that is used with such a system.
So like basically like 5 to 10 running a miner is basically you're only adding 5 to 10% of the electrical use.
Correct.
That your water heater would use. So
correct.
Okay, so basically you're paying. I mean, I should have looked at my water heater before this because I'm curious as to what the yearly estimated number that they put on the sticker is. But how much did your water heater?
So I think mine has a sticker of like $250 on it.
$250 a year, so like
so
$20 a month.
Yes.
And
but
so
the miner generates Bitcoin during that time.
So how much Bitcoin is it generating?
It depends on how much water you use, of course, because it doesn't run all the time at 100% because it goes up and down.
Yeah.
But right now, I would hope like an S9 that runs every single day, that runs full time. I actually have to look this up right now. But I think an S9. Give me one sec.
I'm gonna have to like look this up because I have a
Yeah, so an S9 generates $1.7 per day with a Bitcoin price of like bad.
Yeah.
So right now, so even today with a bad Bitcoin price, with a very low Bitcoin price, you still make $1.78 a day if the S9 would run 100% all the time. Now, let's say it maybe runs for like a third of this. So you're making 50 cents maybe.
50 cents a day, so you're making
Yep.
$15 a month.
Correct.
So you basically have lowered your electrical bill that was, well, let's say, so your electrical bill, let's say it was $20 a month just for the heater. You were saying it adds 5 to 10%. Let's just say worst case scenario, it adds 10%. So your electricity you're paying is now $22 a month to heat your water, but you're getting $15 a month back in Bitcoin.
Correct. Yes.
So you've effectively lowered it $13, more than half.
Yes. Correct.
Now how much do the S9s cost?
I mean, right now with the low Bitcoin price, they're like at $500-600.
Can they be profitable if they run on a daily basis?
So I think when the price was at 50,000, they're actually profitable. So, and my plan, of course, is the Bitcoin that I mine with them. I'm not going to sell them right now.
Oh yeah, no, just hold on to it.
And so that's the other calculation. Like if you look at it from the longer term, it actually hopefully the price will go up more, and so it makes more sense in the future.
Yeah, no, 100%.
And now if you use like an S19, which is already profitable today, I mean, the whole calculation gets only better. Like an S9 is one of the worst things you can buy right now in terms of efficiency of Bitcoin miners. So it's just $600. An S19, which has way better efficiencies than like $8,000. So the cost upfront is obviously much higher. But if that's something you can do, you can have a way faster return on investment, because just the efficiency is so much higher.
What does the terahash get up to on an S19 if you were doing it with the immersion for this heating system?
Yeah, so my S9 uses 1,600 watts and can go up to 16, 17 terahash. So we divide 1,600 divided by 16. So you have like 100 watts per terahash. If you get an S19 that uses 3,500 watts, and you can get easily to 110 watts, terahashes, you're down to 31 watts per terahash. So it's 3 times more efficient than an S19 is 3 times more efficient than an S9.
So you'll use, do you have any S19s?
I don't have an S19 right now, no.
Because that's what I bought. I'm curious.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Because I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna go for it. Initially, I told my wife I wanted to buy like 4 or 5 of them. She was like, let's just start with one. And figure that out. But yeah, I'm just like, I'm sitting here thinking because then also I have, like, we just opened our swimming pool, and it has this really nice heating system, and I'm looking at that going, okay, that's like the pool guys are opening it and like putting it all together, and I'm just sitting there. Of course, I'm like orange pilling the pool guys, like, somehow Bitcoin comes up, and the one of the pool guys, he was like, oh yeah, I made like $200 on it last year. He might even be listening to this, because like whenever we were leaving, whenever he was leaving, he was like asking a couple questions about like the hardware wallet, and so I said, the Bitbox, go with that, and then he asked my name, and I said, I was like, I have a podcast, and he was like, oh, cool, I'll check it out. So he might be listening right now, which would be really funny. Yeah, what's up, pool guy? And like I said, I live in a town of like 500 people, so like when we were leaving, he's like, I'll see you again, I'm sure. But I'm sitting there looking at it once it was all hooked up yesterday, and I'm like, I bet you I could heat this pool.
Yeah, no problem.
Without having to use the heater.
Yep.
Like,
yeah. And it gets warm enough. Like, that's the only thing. You can get the oil like to 140 degrees, no problem, maybe 150, 160. I had people asking me like, could I cook with this? And so, and that's like, then gets hard.
Yeah.
Because you just need higher temperatures, and the problem is the miners are not built for these higher temperatures. But yeah, any application that you need some kind of heat, and the heat that you need is less than 150 Fahrenheit, which is like 60, 70 degrees Celsius, you can use. So my plan is actually, so the water heater is just the beginning. And I'm using the water heater right now because that's what we're using every single day.
Yeah.
Because it's summer now, at least in the whole northern hemisphere. But our house is heated by radiators. So there is an oil furnace, like we have an oil tank in the ground that burns oil to heat water to circulate the water through the house. And that's what runs through these radiators. So my end goal is, after I figured out the water heater, to add a couple of more S9s in there, because to heat the house, you're gonna need way more. Like it's you're talk about like 10 kilowatts or so of like the oil that generates. But the idea is to have the same system, but to have like Y wells to automatically see, oh, the water is hot. Now I'm heating the water for the house with the oil. And yes, eventually, like we don't own a pool right now, but that could be the third one, so that you could also put like the waste energy, because in the end, what I would love to do is to run the miners all the time, or maybe at the most efficient level. Like they actually have an S9 runs the most efficient at 900 watts, not actually 1,600 watts. Like they use more energy to how much terahash they generate. So, and every miner has like a sweet spot of where they run perfectly. And that's the cool thing with the immersion. You can get it to exactly that temperature, to that watt level. It's a bit harder with air, because you just have way less control over the air that goes in, like how hot the air is that goes in. But with immersion, you have full control over that. And
with immersion, like the fans aren't running at all. It's just
there's no vent.
Yeah, it's just
you take the fans away.
So you take the fans off,
yes,
and just put the machine in.
Correct.
And have the power supply plugged in, and have the Ethernet cord plugged in.
Yes. So with the S9s, there's actually the suggestion is to run the power supply outside, because the power supply actually has a less high temperature that it can run at. So it would shut off before the miners shut off. That's just because the S9 miners, or the S9 power supply was never built for that. So my power supply actually sits outside, and just the cables just go inside. With S19s, where the power supply is physically built into the miner, you can't separate it. I mean, you could, but it's way too complex. There you can actually, you immerse the whole thing, and you just take the fans away from all of it. So you take the fans away from the power supply, and you take the fans away from the miners. There are some people that I talk to that do immersion, they still leave one fan in it to create a bit more circulation of the oil. So there might be some improvements, but it's not necessary. Like my system runs without fans in any way. It's also, some fans really don't like to be running the oil. Like they don't run, they like jitter. So you have to find a fan that works. But I think it's something that people can experiment with. But most my immersion system that I have seen completely remove the fans.
Now, what's it feel like putting something in oil? Like,
it's a very strange feeling. Like the first time that like you have the miner in there, and then like you pour like oil over it, it's like everything inside of you sounds like you're doing something wrong. It's just like you, and it also doesn't look like oil. That's the other thing. Like,
it looks like water.
It looks like water. Yes, it's
that's gonna be hard. That's gonna be hard for me, because it's like, okay, I just spent $9,000 on this machine, and like I'm just gonna pour a liquid on it.
The first time I was like, okay, I hope just that there's no sparks.
Oh man, it's so weird. Like, for example, I don't know what I have, iPhone 11 or whatever, some old, not new iPhone, but it was one of the ones that was like, oh, it's waterproof. and I've still never put it underwater. Like I've never done it. Like, and I remember whenever it came out, like people like taking videos and being like, "Hey, look, watch this. This is
Yeah.
underwater." I haven't done it because I'm like, no, you can't put electronics in liquid. Like I can't do it.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, is the oil smell? Is it like have a
No.
big odor?
No.
Now,
It is
does it
completely odorless.
and does it knock out the sound?
The sound of what?
The miner.
Well, there's no sound. There's no fan anymore.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, that. I mean, yeah. It's completely silent.
so it's silent.
Yes.
Takes care of. Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing. Like soundproofing is not a thing anymore because you turn it on and nothing happens. Just an LED comes on. And what is cool on the oil, I have if people go to my Twitter account, I have some videos. It looks like a lava lamp a bit because
yeah.
the hot liquid like rises and you can see like slight temperature changes. So it's actually quite mesmerizing to see the oil like doing like lava lamp things.
That is fascinating. And sorry, I know we only scheduled an hour, but I have a couple questions.
I have more time.
Okay. Because I'm just like my mind's going a million miles an hour, and I'm thinking of so many things. So I'm a hockey player. I played hockey all the way through college, and actually, I don't know if you followed James Lavish at all. He's doing like a lot of like he was a hedge fund manager and stuff. I had him on the show, so there's a bunch of us that are hockey players.
No. I think I've heard that one. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then actually, I played with I didn't play with, but skated in the summertime with the Swiss national team whenever I went over.
Nice.
Because I played in college, and my buddy, his stepdad was like a trainer for them and stuff like that. So anyways, that's a whole nother story. Part of the video that I was watching earlier before we started was I got stuck in Atlanta because my hockey skates set off like the alarms. They were like, you can't travel with like sharp knives. I was like, so it like delayed me and I got stuck there for a day. But anyways, I didn't take the man carry on. I'm not a moron. I'm dumb, but I'm not that dumb. But anyways, so I'm sitting here thinking, because one of the things I've always wanted to do is make an ice rink. Like every winter, I freeze part of our yard.
Nice.
And it was always more difficult when we lived in the suburbs because it was like, okay, here's like this little chunk, and I had to use it with my neighbors. Thought I was insane. Like I'm out there at like midnight with like, I mean, it was like -2 degrees, and I was sitting out there. It was a beautiful night. Stars were out, and I have like cans of beer sitting in the snow, and I'm just sitting there with a hose, like spraying my yard, like, and my neighbors probably think I'm insane. But I've looked up before the possibility of running like you can the way a hockey rink works. I don't know if you've ever looked into it, but basically there's like tons of piping underneath concrete.
Yes.
And they run it's called glycol. I always thought it was like antifreeze, but they run glycol through that's like really cold. It brings the temperature down. I forget where it gets to, but it gets pretty low. And it's not like less than 0. It's probably in the teens Fahrenheit. And then that's how they are able to maintain the ice.
Yeah.
So there are these systems you can buy where you can like, it basically circulates the glycol, and you have these like tubes, you can roll them up, like, you use like plastic tubes and you roll them up in the summer, in the winter or whenever you're not using it, basically, if you're putting it away in the summertime. Thinking pools, I'm getting it backwards in my head, but you then hook up all the system and you run the glycol through, pour water on it, and you basically can have an ice rink. Like if it's like 70 degrees Fahrenheit or less, you can have an ice rink in your yard. But like in the wintertime, people do it because it's, for me, when I did the backyard ice rink, it had to be like, it would have to be less than, I think, 15 degrees for like 4 days straight. Like that was when you had that was when you had a window. You're like, okay, this is my opportunity. So it was like, no matter what, you were going out and freezing the yard then. and then it would melt once the temperature
Yeah.
went up. Whereas if you just wanted to do it for fun and have it like as a regular thing, you have the system set up, you could just run it, but it requires a pump that's like really expensive, and this the heat
Mm.
transfer and everything to keep the glycol cold. But I'm sitting here as you're explaining how the hot water, the hot oil, you know, gets the heat taken away from it and transferred to the water. I'm wondering if there's a way. Yeah, is there a way to use a
Use
miner's heat
to use it
to
for cooling.
to
Yeah.
like
So it's something I haven't looked into too much, but there is a technology called absorption chilling, which
okay.
basically, so it's used on bigger industrial scales, and you find it in like data centers, because they generate a massive amount of heat. And anywhere where you have waste heat, what you can do with an absorption chilling system, you can actually create from hot air or hot water, you can create cool water. And how this technically works. So if you think about your AC system that you have at home, what it does is it has a compressor outside that compresses a liquid, or it compresses a gas into a liquid.
Mm-hmm.
And that liquid is pumped into the house. And then inside, in your inside piece or in your AC ducting, the liquid suddenly gets more space, it expands, and expanding gases or liquid generate or suck air, or suck warmth out of the surrounding, and so it cools down the room or the water or whatever you're trying to cool down. So that's what happens in your fridge. That's what happens in your AC system. But the energy is actually the compressor. So the compressing of the liquid outside, moving it inside, letting it expand. That's the whole cooling system. There are systems out there where instead of using a compressor to compress a liquid, you can use hot air or hot water to compress a liquid. That's an absorption chiller. And it actually exists if you, in some of the RVs, so in my Airstream, I actually have an absorption fridge, and I can run it on propane. And it literally starts a little propane flame that heats up the liquid that then gets compressed, and it moves up, and then it cools down the fridge. So that the technology exists to create from something hot to something cool. What I don't know, and that's something I want to look into, is how hot needs the hot part to be, because I'm a bit worried that 150 degrees is not enough, especially like a propane flame gets way hotter. But I don't know, there might be actually possibilities. And if you Google for like absorption chiller, what you find like shipping container size things, but they're done for like, so we will probably also need to figure out how to make it smaller. But I actually found there are absorption fridges, or like regular 10 cubic feet absorption fridges. They're like double door size fridges. So what I'm probably going to do at one point, I'm going to buy one of them, just rip out the whole inside, because I don't need the fridgy part or the box part. I just need the part in the back, and try to run it with, instead of running propane to it and heat the heating element with propane, I heat the heating element with the hot oil, and see if it's able to create a cool, like it should, then you have a hot part and a cool part. And then if you run a fan through the cool part and basically run this into a room, you would cool the room. Like it's probably going to be quite looking like Frankenstein wise in terms of like how it's gonna, but it's just like, yes, because I mean, that would be, for me at least, like the perfect end goal, to not only heat your house, but also to be able to cool it with your miner. Because the amount of electricity we pay for running our AC, I mean, it's crazy. Yeah, it's insane.
So
but
we could.
I'm just like, I'm in the very, very early stages of researching that. But of course, that would be super cool.
So you could use the heat pressure basically to condense the gas into a liquid.
Correct.
And then when the liquid runs into the house, it's cold, And as it expands, it gets
even colder. Yeah.
okay. And that's the cooling element, and then the gas goes back.
Goes out again, gets compressed again by the hot liquid, by the hot oil, goes in. So yeah.
Huh.
It's actually a bit more complex. So if you Google for like schemas of like absorption chillers, it has multiple multiple loops of liquids. It's a bit more complex than an AC, but it is there. It is technically possible. And I've been in data centers in my VR job where they use the hot air that runs through an absorption chiller, and that creates cool water again that then they use to cool down the data center again.
Huh. So, I mean, eventually you could be heating and cooling your house all off of Bitcoin miners.
Correct.
Now, the entrepreneurial question next comes is, do you want to start a business where I mean, because seriously, you could just put together a little system, and then you could take like the average Joe that, and like, I mean, you could walk into Shark Tank. That would be a really, really funny way to surprise orange pill Mark Cuban, would be to show up with this little box and be like, you plug this thing in, you attach it to the exit valve, and you attach it up here, and it heats your system, reduces your electrical bill by X number of dollars or whatever. It'd be funny because they'd all be tripping over themselves. They're like, oh my God, you could save the consumer, what were you saying? It was $250 a year. So it's like, hey, let's sell this thing to somebody for $100. And in that first year, and $100, you're gonna save $100 on your energy bill. Yep. It's a no-brainer. They'd be tripping over themselves, let's get that installed in every house in America. And then it would be really funny with Mark Cuban to be like, oh, by the way, because when they go, well, how's this thing work? Oh, it is a Bitcoin miner in there. So
and it doesn't work if Dogecoin. It doesn't.
You're a moron for talking down on it this whole time, and the ESG FUD and everything. Yes. But that's fascinating because this opens up so many opportunities.
Agree. Now, my end goal, I mean, I don't know exactly what is going to happen with this system. Like for right now, the system is for me to experiment. I'm mostly interested to prove or to figure out how much the losses are. Because if the losses are, as I think, between 5 to 10%, you have a viable system. Like it makes sense to build such a system because the savings over time will pay for the system and more. And yes, like you said, like imagine you go to Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever you're going to buy a water heater, and there's a regular water heater that costs you $800 to $1,000, and there's another water heater that is free. And you buy the water heater, you put it at your home, you connect it to your Wi-Fi, and that's it. And the Bitcoin that is mined goes back to the company that sold you the water heater.
Yes, there you go.
And like, why would you ever buy a normal water heater? Like, why? Like, who with the right mind will go to a Home Depot and not buy the free water heater?
Like yeah, here's a free water heater. You just have to plug it in and connect to this. Go to the web interface, dude. I might have to like bleep some of this out because I think we have a business idea.
Well, if you look at my Twitter DMs, there's a lot of other people that also have the same.
I'm sure.
So I really like the problem is though, and that's what I'm basically telling everybody right now. Like for me, the system as it is today
is not commercial.
Is not commercially viable because it involves the external miner. Yeah. So for me, it starts to become commercially viable as soon as we can actually build the miner into the water heater itself. But for that, we need to have ASIC chips that can be bought, because I don't know. So right now, you cannot go to Antminer or WhatsMiner and saying, I just want to buy 1 million ASICs, like the actual chip. They're like half an inch by half an inch chips. You cannot. They only sell you the full assembled miner. And so what we would need for the water heater, we would need the custom system where like the ASICs, for example, are like all like in a tube. They're all outside, like they're all pointing to the outside, and the tube goes into the water heater. but because the chips are not waterproof, so you need to somehow create an enclosure where you could heat use the chips. Now, that's not possible. But what is super exciting is Block, that's Jack's company, they announced...
Which, by the way, I DM him like every 3 days.
Okay.
Because I'm like, one of these days he's going to respond. But
yeah,
I have all these lightning ideas and stuff.
If he listens to that, I want to build a Bitcoin water heater, because so they announced that they will, and together with Intel, you will be able to buy the chips individually. So a company can buy the chips, can build a custom PCB, that is the pipe, for example, that you could maybe, I mean, that would be the coolest thing. You can actually, like the heating element in a water heater, they're replaceable.
Yeah.
You can empty the water heater and you can screw them out. It's like that long. It has like a circumference of like, I don't know, 2-3 inches. And you could just like maybe put the Bitcoin water heater element in it. And it's waterproof because it's like steel, aluminum, I don't know what. And that's it. That then I think that's the commercial viability, because my system right now, it has exposed liquid. It has so many, like it has pumps. Like there is like all like the oil, because like it actually like normal like pipe thread doesn't really work. So like the oil leaks out a little bit. So I have to like re-tighten the thread sometimes. So it's fine for me, but it's not something I'm always using like my parents or like my neighbors.
Yeah.
It's not something I would feel comfortable right now to put into someone else's house and saying, here, this will now generate Bitcoin for you.
So the oil loosens the threads?
I'm just having a hard time making it fully waterproof or leak-proof, basically. That's maybe also that I'm not a plumber and I probably use too much tape or not enough or whatever. That could be another problem. But I mean, it's not like actively leaking.
But yeah,
I can just see that like there's a little bit of oil around the threads.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, I wonder from the commercially viable, because yeah, you could replace the heating element on the inside, but like if you could make it something that you just connect, like make it the size of a box that you put next to your water heater, connect to that valve, and
yes,
have a pipe that goes up to the top and connects. I mean, that would probably, I think, be the most commercially viable, just so that people don't have to even get into their water heater. They just go, oh, okay, yeah, I do this.
Yes, and there is actually a company in France that tries to do that. I have not seen an actual product running, but I think that's what they're trying to do. There's other companies that build space heaters with Bitcoin miners. So it's basically just an S9 that has a really big fan under it, and it looks fancy. So there are, I can see the first companies doing this, but for me, like from a purely entrepreneurial thing, it's like you're so much depending on another company producing these miners and continuously producing them, that until you have full control over the supply chain in terms of like you can buy the chips and you can build the boards, because that's the other problem. Like if the boards of an S9 or an S19, if there's broken, there are like the producers of the miners, they give out some debugging tools and stuff like that, but they never give the full specs of these chips. So I think if you really want to build a company around this, where you depend on income, that you then depend on another company of what they're doing.
Yeah, you want to limit the amount of companies you depend on.
Correct. Yes. And then like if you have like, let's say your Riot or Marathon, and you just have all these miners in there, and if one of them breaks, you just put another one in. Okay, that's not a big deal. But if this is at somebody's home and then the person doesn't have hot water anymore,
that's a problem.
It's just like, but I think we are really close. Like if
because
Intel is going to do that, then I think it's going to go fast.
Yeah. And I mean, if you were able to build your own system and then not replace the heating element on the inside, then they could leave that there as a backup. Where if the miner ever kicks for a little bit, they'd only notice because they'd get alerted that their miner went off, but their hot water wouldn't go away. But That is something. I mean, seriously though, like if Jack is listening to this with come in, like I appreciate all you listeners, but I know we do not have the reach yet. The reach is Jack Dorsey. Because I mean, I like it's only because I know he's really into lightning, and there's other people that are into it and have all these ideas, and I'm working on different things, like I said, I'm not the tech person, I'm the idea person. So I was like, you know what, whenever these ideas come to me and like I just want to shoot something out there, if typically am sending it to someone else that like actually communicates with me, but I'll send the same message to him so that like one day if he opens the DMs, he's gonna look through and go, oh damn, this guy's got a lot of good ideas,
Yeah.
Because like I even put that in there amongst the messages. At one point I said, I'm not blowing up your DMs just to blow them up. I'm blowing them up because I'm like, if you ever take a look, you're gonna see, okay, he's got a bunch of ideas. Let's
Nice.
talk.
Yeah.
But this is something, Jack, if you're listening, this is totally something Block should be doing.
Yeah, because I really believe, like, maybe not right now, but in the very, very future, a very close future, it's going to be a very stupid idea to do anything in terms of heating or maybe even cooling that does not also include a Bitcoin miner. Like,
Yeah.
even if you look at your house, like, sure, the water heater is very obvious because it's something that A, uses a lot of energy, and B, has actually a lot of, but technically, your hair dryer,
Yeah.
like already, like there could be now. Of course, we have to be obvious here that like your hair dryer maybe runs, I don't know, for half an hour max per day, and buying a Bitcoin chip and putting it in there so it runs half an hour doesn't really make sense. Like, this would be a very, very expensive. But who knows? Maybe the chips are going to be
they'll be
cheaper.
cheap enough eventually where anything, like all of your devices that generate heat.
Yes. And if we can figure out the cooling as well, I mean, that would be freaking awesome. But I think, yeah, so what my plan is really about is I'm building the system right now, and I'm trying to figure out how it works. It's just working now for a couple of days and weeks. But what I want to do is I want to build a full build guide, basically, for anybody that feels adventurous and says, hey, I'm a bit of tinkerer, and I know like roughly how piping works, and I'm not afraid of playing with this, that they can basically build the system that I've built completely by themselves. Because all the parts you can buy on Amazon, you can buy on Home Depot, Lowe's, like it's nothing fancy. The liquid you can buy from Engineered Fluids, like they ship to normal.
How much is that liquid?
I'm running, I think, 10 gallons. That's like $500.
Okay, so
let's
list it for the pleb. So the supplies you need, you said fish tank.
Yes, you need a fish tank.
Piping, a PVC pipe.
You need some PVC piping. I use a combination of PVC pipe, because normal PVC pipe is only rated to 140 Fahrenheit. So that would actually melt. So you need the chlorinated. That's the yellowish one. Then I use PEX piping, just because it's simpler to like bends and stuff. So you can use PEX. You're gonna need 2 pumps, just circulation pumps that you can find on eBay or Amazon. You need the plate exchanger. You'll find them on Amazon as well. And the miner. Basically, that's it.
And how much do you think, if you had to ballpark it, that whole system setup cost you?
So the most expensive is the BitCool. That was like $500. The miner, another $500. And then the rest of it, like maybe like another $500. So $1,500 for all together.
Okay.
Yeah, if you go to mine, like the system that I've built, so if people go to my Twitter account and see it, that's like, it has 6 different temperature sensors, it has flow sensors in it. It's just, I built it, I over-engineered it to be able to measure every single piece of it. Like I said, that's not necessary at all. It would be super simple to just use the internal temperature system of the miner. But if somebody wants to build a bit more, yes, you could add a temperature sensor. So you have a little Raspberry Pi that is the temperature sensor connected, and then the Raspberry Pi will tell the miner when to turn on and off. So I will also create guides on like how to use that. I mean, that's actually the first part I'm going to do, is like how to control your miner from Raspberry Pi, because there's all these people that use miners just to heat the house, like with air, like they just run the miners in their garage. And right now it's very hard to control based on that. Or there's people that want to use solar power, so they have solar panels on their house, and they want to use the excess energy that they generate from the solar instead of pumping it back into the grid. And sometimes you don't get anything, or you get very bad conditions for it. You have a couple of miners that basically should follow the sun. So if it's sunny, they should run. And if it's not sunny and the PV system doesn't generate any electricity, they shouldn't run. Right now, that's not really possible. But with the home assistant system, you can measure the excessive energy that the solar panels generate. And you can tell the miners to run or not run. So there's all kind of other people interested in connecting your miners to your actual home automation system, beside of like the water heater part.
Yeah. And so now for heating and cooling the house, I had like the electrician down, and he's looking at everything, and I said to him, he does HVAC too, and I was looking, and like there's in our house like a radon tube that like monitors if there's radon, and it just constantly is running, but it has like a PVC pipe that comes out of the ground, like from the foundation of the house, and then it goes out, like, and I know where it comes out on the outside. So I was like, oh, I could just drill a hole there for a vent, put like a dryer vent there, and have dryer tubing, and then now that it's summertime, pump the heat there. And then whenever it's wintertime, just move that dryer tube in over, because the whole setup's right next to the furnace and water heater for me. That's where the miner will be. So I was like, I could just pump it into the heater. But my question then, whenever I was telling the electrician this, he was like, you might not have to worry about it with the air. And he kind of briefly explained it, but like, I'm curious as to your thoughts, because he said something. We have a heat pump, and I don't know exactly how it works, because we just moved in the winter, and I'm used to like a regular furnace. Like, how does it work exactly? And he was saying something like he thinks that even if I just ran it and let the heat be there, it might help draw the heat out of the house or something like that. But like, is there a way? Then I was looking at the system, and I was like, there is part of the house. There is a part of the vent system that goes away from the house, doesn't it? It's like I wouldn't have to drill a new hole.
So he meant like in order to heat the house during winter?
Well, he meant like even for the cooling. He was like, during the cooling, it might help extract the heat out and lower the temperature of the house, which I was kind of confused by. But
yeah, so basically, if you have a heat pump, it's basically like the AC, like it's just the AC system in reverse. So instead of running wherever the liquid gets compressed is the warm part, and wherever the liquid is that releases is the cold part. Now that's usually with an AC is the compressing happens outside and the expanding happens inside. But with a heat pump, it's basically just an AC that can run in reverse. So then the compressing happens inside and the expanding happens outside. So inside is where it gets warm and outside is where it gets cold. And so I think what he probably means is that just because the room is warm, that it will be more efficient, I think. But I'm also not an...
Yeah, you're not an HVAC.
Not yet, I guess.
But like if I just pump it into the way I looked at it, I was like, I take one of those dryer tubes and pump it right into the
big vent where
where it all goes out. Like it'll have enough airflow, right, from the fan to just go.
I mean, if you search for, like, there are a couple of like Twitter lists of home miners, there are people that did exactly this. So you see the big metal casing where like the heater is inside, or the heat exchanger for the AC system or the venting system, and there's like 3 S9s, and they all like just pipe in, and that's it. Like they just blow hot air into the existing system, and because there happens to be more hot air in the system runs the heater less.
Yeah,
because it measures. So yeah, no, that totally.
Yeah, I mean, there was Adam O from Denver Bitcoin.
Yeah.
He said to me, he said something like his house was like 75 degrees like all winter. And
it's a lot. Like honestly, that's something I wasn't. It's a lot of heat. Like
I'm amazed. It gets
like
up
an
to
S19,
140 degrees.
3.5 kilowatts. That's a lot of hot air. Like you have to like actively pipe this somewhere to cool it. Like I said, like my S9, which is 1,600 watts, like it most of the day it runs at like 200-300 watts, because like after a shower, yes, like you can easily, like we have a 40-gallon tank, and the shower uses like between maybe 10 to 20 gallons. That's a long shower. It then just runs for like maybe an hour at the highest temperature again, and the water is back to 130 degrees, and then it shuts down again. Like it's a lot of energy that that these miners use and generate, and therefore heat. So yeah, you really have to think about where to put it all. So I think, yeah, you could easily heat your house way too hot in winter if you don't have a system that like measures it.
And with one S19, am I going to make the water too hot?
So you can't really make the water too hot. Like the only danger is, well, the danger is that you get it above boiling.
Yeah,
but you won't be able to do that. The only problem is, so usually, and that's maybe something I would look at. Usually water heaters in the US heat the water to 120, some of them to 140 degrees. And the reason for that is because bacteria, like they all die at like above 140. Most of them die at 120. So there's like actually some discussion if you should heat your water to 120 to 140. Doesn't matter really. But if you have 140-degree water, you can scald yourself within seconds.
Yeah.
So if somebody lets the hot water running and it comes out 140 degrees and you just put your hand under it and you remove it, you have burn marks already.
Oh yeah.
So what actually exists, there are mixing valves that you add after the water heater again, that mix the cold water and the hot water again, so that it is max 120 degrees.
A little bit, yeah.
So you store the water in 140 because so that all the bacteria and stuff die, but the water that actually gets to the tab is max 120. And 120, you can still, even if you run it at full speed, if you put your hand under it, you remove it, you don't burn yourself. Yeah. And so that's maybe the only thing that I suggest is that if a house doesn't have a mixing valve yet, and people want to plan to run the water heater hotter than 120 degrees, maybe get a mixing valve, specifically if you have kids, because it just like be bad. But yeah, and technically you could run your water heater at 160, 180 degrees. Like it doesn't really matter. It's just the thing you have to understand is the hotter you get your water, the tank, the more energy losses you have, because usually the water tanks are made for a specific water temperature. So if you heat it hotter, there's more heat that can go out and then basically goes into the environment. And so you lose that. And so but in the end, energy, you don't lose it. All that happens is the room that the water heater is in is warm. So yeah, it's not lost energy. You just don't have it inside the water anymore. And like I said, the Bitcoin miner will stop at like 115 Celsius of the chips. Now the chips always run way hotter than the actual liquid because the temperature sensor is literally on the chip itself. So yeah, even if you would do nothing, what would happen is your water will probably get to 150, 160 degrees, and then the miner shuts off because it reaches the temperature. What could happen is you could destroy your miner with that.
So is there a way for me to use this S19 that I already bought? Well, it's actually the What's Miner M30S
Yes.
or whatever.
Yes.
Would it get too hot though? Like, does it produce more heat than the S9 does, or is it?
It's around the same. I don't know exactly what you can do with the WattsMiner software. So that's something we will need to look into. But usually they have some kind of settings that you can like underclock it, basically, that it doesn't get that hot.
But what if I want it running at the most proficient as possible, and making as much money as possible?
So what I'm all using Antminers because you can run Brains on it, and Brains is the tool that will work with the Home Assistant together, and it has this auto power setting. So it realizes, like you can tell it, when the chip gets, let's say, to 100 degrees Celsius, it should automatically throttle the power down. So if your water gets hot enough, or it reached the capacity, the miner liquid will get warm, the chip gets warm, and it will automatically throttle down. Now I know that Brains is currently also really close to releasing the same software also for WattsMiners, so you can probably use that. Until then, I think what's going to happen is that the WattsMiner will just shut off at a specific temperature. At least that's what my understanding is. But yeah, you can play around with it when you have it. But I don't think there's something that you have to worry about. Yeah, like specifically on the water part. Like you cannot get the water hot enough or too hot. At least in my understanding, there's no such thing.
Okay. Huh. Well, Michael, you have blown my mind with all of this stuff, and I mean, wait, so you're just an engineer, inventor?
I'm just a person with a YouTube account, and I'm not afraid of like using a welder or a screwdriver. That's like
that's what you did. Yes. That's how you got there.
Yes, I didn't even have to use the welder for that project. No, it's like I'm curious. I'm interested. I want to learn things. I want to play with things. Like even as a child, like I probably took every piece apart that I could find and then didn't know how to build it back together. I felt like it probably pushed me to my limit of what I knew in terms of plumbing. Like I've done plumbing in a house before, but it's a bit more with like temperature sensors and stuff. That was really interesting. And just like, yeah, seeing an electrical piece inside a liquid.
I know. I don't know if I could do that. I'm like, but I wonder if it's going to make it more, if the miner itself will be more profitable, if it's worth that extra, $500 to do the immersion.
I mean, in the end, the water heater is one of the main electrical cost in your house. Like, I don't think people realize this, but beside of an air conditioning, that's like it uses like the water elements in it are 3 to 4 kilowatts. So and it runs like I measured mine, and it easily runs for 2 to 3 hours a day if I calculate all together. Like if you take a shower and then the dishwasher and all that stuff. And so this uses 12 to 15 kilowatt hours every single day. So that's like $1 to $2 a day. So yeah, it's easily goes up to, like we said, $300 a year that just your water heater uses. And if you could use the energy or the heat that your miner generates, and specifically, if you think about having a pool and stuff, I think the immersion makes sense. Plus, the other thing is, these things are loud, like 90 decibels. Like every time I connect my normal S9, like or the T9s, I'm just like, oh shit, I forgot how loud they are. Yeah, like I can hear it from the house. Like if it runs in the garage, I can hear from the house if the miner is running or not.
I'm curious. Yeah, I wonder how loud it's going to be. Because we'll be plugging it in here in the next couple days. So I'm gonna be curious when it gets plugged in. So it might be by force. My wife might say, "Hey, look, you gotta quiet this thing down."
And then it's like it's not easy. Like you probably have seen the black boxes from upstream data.
Mhm.
Like it's suddenly like that's really nice, but suddenly like it makes the
It's a
whole
huge
footprint.
box. Yeah.
It's a huge box. I mean, it has to be because of all the labyrinth they have to do for the air.
So immersion really is honestly a much better answer.
Yes, if you're willing to do the plumbing and stuff like that. And I really like encourage anybody. So anybody that has a little bit of experience in plumbing or is not afraid of learning how like the plumbing connectors work and all that stuff. I think, yeah, give it a try.
With regular immersion, how do they do it? I saw one of them at the conference, but like
Yes.
if I just wanted to do, let's just say I wanted to, sorry to ask you more questions.
No, good. That's good.
But if I just wanted to do immersion mining with this miner and not use it to heat my water tank or whatever, I mean, how do you
would pump the liquid into a radiator and you just run air through the radiator. So these industrial systems that have immersion cooling, they basically have a huge pipe of the oil that goes outside. And outside you have, like, if you look like in a big city, on top of the houses, you have all these fans.
The big fans, yeah.
That's what you would have. That's where the air, or that's where then you would exchange the heat of the liquid back into the air, but outside. And because the fans can be much bigger than like these 4-inch fans that run like jet engines, because they're big fans and you have way more space with like the radiators, because the radiators like go through a massive amount of big copper. It's just, you can run the fans like a little bit, and so it's just like the outside of your AC system, your air conditioning outside unit. It would be basically that.
Interesting. Wow, this is fascinating, because you couldn't just put it in like a fish tank and not have it circulating. It would get
I mean, mine, like, you could maybe run it for like 10 minutes and then the liquid is at temperature and your miner will shut off. No, you act like, I mean, that's really something I've learned. Like, there's a lot of heat that you generate, so this needs to go somewhere and fast. Like, I mean, I can run my system without running the pump for maybe max 5 minutes, and then the temperature of the liquid is already at 150 Fahrenheit.
Interesting. Well, I'll tell you what, we might have to do this again in a short time, because I'm gonna have more questions. I'm gonna be blowing you up in DMs and we'll have to do this again, where maybe once I get set up here and get, I mean, the pool would be the easiest. I can know off the top of my head. I could, that's an easy couple.
The pool
pipes.
is the only problem is that usually you have a couple of things in the pool itself, like some, I don't know, chlorinations or whatever that could attack the pipes. So that's the only other complex thing. So you just have to be more aware of, because it's not fresh water like that.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing with the pool. And then the plate exchanger, everything has to be made for it, that it doesn't corrode or anything.
Yeah, it has to be made for chlorine.
But I mean, if you there are people that have built the same system that I have, but all instead of the water heater, they just have a pump, and on one side of the pump it goes into the pool, and it sucks water out of the pool, goes to the plate exchanger, and just puts it back. Like they didn't even like connect it like into the existing water heater.
They just
into the existing heating system. They just have they have a hose that goes into the pool and a hose that goes out of the pool that goes to the garage, and you run this and it heats the pool. Like it just gets warm.
It's amazing.
So you like, if you have a pool, I think that's probably even simpler to start with, because you don't have to plumb it. Because that's the other thing. In the water heater, you have water pressure all the time. So every time you do something, you have to like turn off the water pressure. You have to release the pressure, because I happen to have like open up like one of the PAX connectors without like turning off the water pressure.
Water just shooting everywhere.
I'm like showering myself in like 120-degree hot water. So wasn't the most fun experience, but no, it's like like I am my shirt, make mistakes. So that's how we
Yeah.
all learn.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and tell people
course.
where can they follow you and follow your adventures here in water heating and Bitcoin mining.
Yeah, if you want to follow me along on a day by day, it's on my Twitter account at Schnitzel, the German word for the veal dish. And there I will also publish, and my plan is to create a whole guide on how the miner is built, with screenshots, and I'm also planning to do some videos on actually how it works, how it's connected, so that somebody that wants to build this themselves, they can also build it at home.
Awesome. And you have a YouTube channel too?
Yes, that I just started like a couple of days ago because people asked me for videos. I think it's also at Schnitzel, but there's a link in my Twitter bio to it, so
okay,
you'll find it there.
Awesome. Well, Michael, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That'll do it for this week's episode. I want to thank the BitBox02 hardware wallet from Shift Crypto. Again, go to shiftcrypto.ch/Bitcoin Made Simple and use the promo code Bitcoin Made Simple to get 5% off. Thanks.